Aquaba, welcome to You Ain't Imagining This. I'm your sister-host, Amma Robin, and I'm so glad you're here today because I've got a story to tell. Here in YAIT Town, we believe that our stories matter. We tell our real stories not because they have all the answers, but because naming our lived experiences help us restore ourselves, reconnect with one another, and imagine a more free future. Today's episode is one of my own stories. This experience happened while I was recently staying at a beautiful seaside resort in Sweden. No need to get worried or to get tense. Nothing dramatic happened, but the subtle and uncomfortable experience has stayed with me. And I think you know what I mean, and I think you know why. It made me think more, perhaps differently, about what freedom is and what it means to truly feel at home in a space. I can't wait to tell you my story, so come on in and let's get started. And you ain't imagining this. I was staying at a cute resort in Sweden. Right by the seaside, there was a great spa, beautiful pools, lovely restaurants, great areas to walk around outside the hotel. I was ready for a long weekend of relaxation on the beach, daily hikes, birding, you know how much I love to bird, nightly saunas, and great meals every night in their rustic restaurants. On the first day, I arrived in the late afternoon just in time for a short walk and then dinner. When I walked into the restaurant that first evening, I thought I was there just for dinner, but it turned out there was more. I was there, I think, to learn something about belonging. But the first thing I noticed was the music. There was soul music, black music, Aretha, Marvin, the Spinners. You remember the Spinners? Okay, maybe I'm showing my age, but they were all there. Jamiroquai. Okay, they're not soul or black, but they added to the vibe. The music and the vibes drifted gently through the restaurant as people settled in for the evening, and as I settled in, I smiled and just soaked it all in. Then I looked around the room. I was the only black person there. As I walked to my table, I noticed people looking at me. No, not everyone, and not dramatically, but just enough for me to notice. When our eyes met, several people quickly looked away. Some lowered their eyes to the menu or just looked at something in the corner. Others seemed just really interested in the artwork on the wall. I appreciated that. No one frowned or scowled at me. No one said anything. No one made me feel openly unwelcome. Nothing happened that I could point to and say, there, that was it. And yet there's a story here, because something had happened. I became aware of myself as the only black person in the entire space. And I noticed that others had noticed too. And that changed everything. I noticed how I was walking, where I placed my hands. Should I keep them in my pocket? Should I make them visible? Whether I was speaking too loudly, whether I was taking up too much space, how I was dressed, whether I somehow stood out simply by being there. Yes, I did. This is a difficult feeling to describe. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't danger. It was the feeling of becoming unusually aware that you're being noticed, observed, not surveilled, but watched. And not because I had done anything or was doing anything, simply because I was different from everyone else in the room. And by different, I meant not white. There was a time in my life, I'm going to admit this to you, when that feeling would have quietly changed my plans. I would have decided to eat in my room instead, or to skip the restaurant the next evening. And not because anyone had told me to leave, but because I didn't want to carry the weight of feeling so visible and so different, and to be honest, vulnerable. But I decided that I was not going to change my plans tonight, or myself, or try to make myself less visible. Tonight, I stayed. And I stayed as me. A black woman who had just flown in from Belgium, taken a short walk by the seaside, observed some native birds, and was ready for dinner. And so I stayed. And I ate. And yes, I remained very aware of the extra long glances, the double glances, the wait person who didn't expect me to be able to read the Swedish menu. Yes, I could. And who knew the cutlery uses. Yes, I do. And who also knows the difference between a Cabernet and a Chardonnay. I mean, who doesn't? I had a great dinner. Service was slow, yeah, and I was one of the last people to leave the restaurant, but I didn't care. And I didn't tippy-toe to my room. I glided back to my room, listening to music by my people. Yes, it was still playing. And yes, I was still vigilant. The next day, I spent time by the pool, took a walk by the sea, and went to Lund. That's a university town that was around 30 minutes drive away. And because it was a university town, I think, I met people who approached me and talked. This was far different than the distant stares at the hotel. I didn't feel that sense of hypervigilance. Did I see more black people there? Yes, a few. But it was a completely different energy in the city. Now, I returned to the hotel that night, and I went to a fish shack, it's hard to say, right on the water for dinner that evening. Surprise, surprise, more stairs. And the night after that, I went to a fancier restaurant at the hotel. And that night, each night, I noticed the same thing. Extra long glances, eyes that moved away when I happened to look up. The quiet awareness that I was the only black person in that entire space. Now, I'm not going to say I knew what anyone was thinking. Maybe they were simply curious. Maybe they hadn't had many black guests there. I honestly don't know. What I do know is what it felt like inside my own body. I felt watched. I felt noticeable. I felt different. And I'm going to repeat it. I felt vulnerable. Not unsafe, but also not safe. Not different in a beautiful, celebrated way, just different enough that I became more aware of myself than I wanted to be. And over the next few days, I noticed that same feeling in other parts of the resort, walking through the lobby, relaxing in the spa, sitting in some of the common areas with the book. It wasn't one moment. It became an atmosphere. It was the atmosphere of that hotel. But I'm jumping ahead too. I just want to take you back for a minute because I had lived in Sweden many years before, and that's why I could read the Swedish menu. And the feeling was almost exactly the same. And not because I had been thinking about it all those years. It was as though my body remembered that before my mind did. And I did notice that I was tense and my shoulders were tightening and my breath was quickening and my eyes were scanning. It just all happened without my even thinking about it. And that's because I felt that familiar awareness, and I remembered that familiar awareness of standing out, of that quiet wondering whether I was being noticed just a little more than everyone else. Now you may ask, why is she complaining? Why is this woman complaining? She's at this beautiful resort. No one's really bothering her. Yes, the place was beautiful. The people were civil. I wouldn't say polite, but they were civil. No one questioned whether I belonged there, at least not openly. And yet, my body wasn't completely at ease. My body was telling the story. A few days into my stay, I'd already planned a meeting with my sister gathering on Zoom. At first, I wasn't going to go because I thought, well, I just want to immerse myself in this space. But after a few days at that resort, I realized I needed my sisters. I needed to connect with my sisters. And when we did, we laughed, we caught up, we shared our lives. I shared my feeling there, and I didn't have to explain or get a skeptical look. They all just nodded. They completely got it. And I didn't have to spend much time explaining it because, they knew. And there's such safety and warmth in telling my story and having them just look back at me with knowing eyes and completely understanding. By the time our conversation ended, I noticed something. The tightness in my body, my shoulders had eased. My breath had become more normalized. The constant awareness, that hypervigilance, had softened. I felt more settled, more grounded, more like myself. And I want to think, well, the sisters didn't rescue me, but quite honestly, they had. And I don't think it was conscious that I needed rescuing, but they had. And they had protected me. They had helped me to feel safe for those moments. They had given me something that every one of us needs and deserves. A place where I didn't have to wonder if I belonged. A place where I could simply be myself and show up in whatever way that I wanted or needed to. And for that, Asante Sana. Thank you, my sisters. You were there when I needed you, and that is what community is for, and that's what community is about. Because when we need each other, we show up. That's what we do here in YAIT Town. And you ain't imagining this. Asante Sana, and thank you for letting me share my story with you. Sharing the experience is such a restorative feeling, and it's so affirming. And I hope that you'll stick with me while we go beyond the story, because there is more to share. There's more that's underneath this. And I've been thinking a lot about those dinners in that time in Sweden. They brought me back to something we talked about in our last conversation here in YAIT Town, the freedom gap. If you weren't there, last week we talked about how the freedom gap is the distance between the freedom that we've been promised or that we expect and the freedom that we actually experience. And I think what happened in Sweden at that resort is one example of that. As I said, nothing dramatic happened. No one told me to leave. No one questioned openly whether I had the right to be there. I didn't feel, though, as free as the people around me appeared to feel. And maybe that's why this story matters so much to me. because it made me ask a different question. What does freedom actually feel like? For so much of our history, we've talked about freedom as removing barriers, changing of the law, changing policies, opening doors, and thank goodness for that. Those victories matter. Those victories are very much under threat now, but those victories mattered, and they still do. Our ancestors fought, sacrificed, and in many cases gave their lives for those freedoms. But I've come to wonder if that's only the beginning. Because, as I did in Sweden and every other place I go, I can legally enter the room and still not feel free once I'm inside. I have access, but I don't feel that I belong. I have rights, but still carry burdens those rights were meant to lift. Is that freedom? Is that really feeling free? And that's why I'm thinking a lot about freedom. Also because Juneteenth just happened and Ketikoti just happened, and those were all Black freedom holidays and celebrations. And I think that's a good time to reflect on what freedom really feels like and what it really is. Maybe freedom isn't only the absence of chains. Let me explain that. Ketikoti, which is when the enslaved people in Suriname became free. Longer story to that, but I won't go into it. And Ketikoti means broken chains. Broken chains. But maybe freedom isn't only the absence or the breaking of chains. Maybe freedom is the presence of dignity, of humanity, of belonging, of feeling welcome, of knowing that you don't have to shrink yourself in order to fit into the room. I remember recently, because also the World Cup's going on, watching Senegal's players arriving in the U.S. for the World Cup. Oh, wow, it was a really grand time, and they looked fantastic. They were free to come, they were free to play, and yet some of them were singled out for additional searches before they could enter. I see pictures of them being tipped over and, patted down, being searched, physically searched. Many other teams, and we know from which countries and what color those people were in those countries, did not go through that kind of indignity or that kind of treatment. But the Senegalese players and other Black players were singled out for those additional searches. I couldn't help wondering, so what kind of freedom begins with asking you or requiring that you prove yourself? What kind of freedom begins with suspicion instead of welcome? And I think that's why this story in Sweden and then these other incidences are all staying with me. Because freedom, to me, isn't just about whether we're allowed to enter. It's also about whether we're received with dignity. So, how do we restore ourselves when our freedom feels diminished? And I think naming is so important. This is a violation of my freedom and undermining my dignity and questioning my humanity. Naming is so important. But I do want to go into restoration. That's so important. So I want to share, and I think I did, how to restore ourselves when we feel diminished. For me, it wasn't leaving the restaurant because I stayed. That wouldn't have restored me. It may for someone else. I have no comment on that. And it wasn't pretending that I didn't notice, because I absolutely noticed. And it wasn't convincing myself that I was imagining this. No, I wasn't imagining it. Other people handle this differently. And as I said, each person is going to handle it the way they're going to, in the way that's most restorative for them. Freedom, for me, was returning to people who accepted me as I am. Being with people whom my belonging wasn't a question. And maybe that is where practicing freedom can begin. For some, it'll begin for others in different places. And not waiting for the whole world to change overnight, but creating, protecting, and growing spaces where our dignity is assumed, and where our humanity is celebrated, and where our belonging is never in doubt. And that's what I'm building in YAIT Town for all of us. And then carrying that freedom with us when we walk back into the world. Because that's a different kind of a walk, don't you think? Can you see that walk? Because I think our ancestors dreamed of more than broken chains. I think they dreamed of lives that could be lived fully and marked with dignity and joy and belonging. And that is the freedom that I'm practicing. And that's the freedom that I'm imagining. As I think about all of this, and as we're winding this down, I want to come back to imagination. Because for so much of our history, we have had to imagine freedoms that we could not yet see. Our ancestors imagined freedom before emancipation. They imagined dignity before it was recognized, and they imagined futures of freedom for their descendants that they might never meet. And because they did imagine, they kept building towards them. And maybe that's our work too. Not only to name the places where freedom still falls short, and there are lots of those places, and not only to restore ourselves when the gap feels heavy, though that is very important, but to dare to imagine, I think have the audacity to imagine what real freedom could feel like. A freedom where belonging is ordinary and dignity is assumed and our humanity is never questioned. Where our children expect to flourish, not simply overcome. I often think about something Toni Morrison said. Dreaming is no afterthought. It's the first order of business. That's right. It's before we can build a more free world, we have to dream it. We have to imagine it. So perhaps practicing freedom isn't only about refusing to shrink ourselves. No, it's not. It's also about expanding our imagination and imagining a world our ancestors hoped we would inherit. And then, maybe little by little, or in big steps, helping to build it. So, I'm going to gently challenge you this week. So this week, don't just notice where freedom is missing. Notice where you can practice it. Notice where you can protect it. And notice where you can imagine more of it. Are you with me? Come on, who's with me? We can do this together. Because, no, you ain't imagining this. Okay, we really are winding this down now. And I'm going to start this by saying, once again, because I don't think you can say it too much, Asante Sana. Thank you so much for spending this time with me here in YAIT Town. If this story resonated with you, I hope that you'll share it with someone who might need to hear it too. You just never know whose experience you're helping to name and whose heart you're helping to lighten. And I would love to hear your story too. You've listened to mine. I would love to hear your story, because that's what we do here in YAIT Town. We share our stories. We listen to one another with care, and we restore each other. And together, we imagine a world with dignity, belonging, and freedom for all of us. I'm Amma Robin, your sister host here in YAIT Town. Until next time, take good care of yourself, keep practicing freedom, and remember, come as you are, take what you need, and you ain't imagining this. Ashe, fam.